So welcome everyone to our sixth episode of Ask Our Experts. It's a real pleasure to be with six esteemed individuals. The topic for discussion is systems consciousness. Perhaps you're not familiar with that term. And I'm really delighted that we've got Professor Geoff Palmer, who will provide a definition of what we mean by system consciousness. And perhaps some of us, may be familiar with such systems as the political system, the class system, the education system, the criminal justice system. But Professor Geoff Palmer will provide a more, I think, appropriate definition which relates to the modern Black community. So before we hear from him, let me introduce these amazing and wonderful individuals. So with us this evening, we have Angela Clarke, psychologist, counsellor, adult health and social care manager, and RAFFA CEO. Thank you, Angela, for being with us.
Thank you.
Then we have Peter Dennis. He's an ex-business management consultant with more than 30 years in education, and he is a school principal and improvement advisor for a school trust. Peter, it's a real pleasure. Then we have Dr. Keith Davidson, former Adventist education director and head teacher, and a CAD publisher and author. Keith, thank you. And then we've got Paul Riddell, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Consultant and Enfield Caribbean Association Deputy Chair. Thank you, Paul. Then we have Emeritus Professor Sir Geoff Palmer, OBE, Barley Abrasion Process Inventor, Human Rights Champion and author. And then finally, we've got Dr. Dwain Neil OBE, Reach Society Chairman, business leader and author. So thank you all. When I read out the names and what you all do, I am incredibly inspired. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So if I may ask, Sir, Professor Sir Geoff Palmer, I wonder if you could begin by telling us what you mean by system consciousness in the United Kingdom.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Donald. You always give me more than I deserve.
Oh, no.
However, it was during the 60s, the 1960s, and even go back to the 50s, that we were having difficulties in London with the education of our children. And what one of the phrases used then in the 1950s was that Black parents have got unrealistic expectations of their children. Unrealistic expectations. And you have to come from that era to have heard that phrase. But I got very concerned about it. And I started to give lectures in the 60s, in my own time, to white teachers. And also I was talking to the Black community, especially Jamaican community. And I'll give you one example, that some of the children were going to classes and, the teacher may say to them, what is an elephant? And could you describe where an elephant lives? And somebody may say, well, in a zoo. Okay, and the teacher would go, and shakes her head from one side to the other and said, anybody else? And somebody would say, okay, Africa or India, and she'd go, The point is that a lot of Black kids had no idea what all that meant. the and the nom and the nodding of head, because that's not their experience at home. And therefore, a lot of the children were not conscious of these nuances that the system uses in terms of education. And I continued my work and, working with the Black community in terms of education. And in 2007, I produced a little book called The Enlightenment Abolished, Citizens of Britishness. And I was trying to discuss this same issue of where people living within a system were not able to respond to it because of nuances which they have no idea what they meant. And this was teaching. And I wanted a term for it. And in my little book, I just call it system consciousness. And what I mean by that is that being aware of expectations, and also not only being aware of expectations, but also knowing how to meet them. And it doesn't matter whether you're Black, white, or any other color. In any culture, you have to be system conscious. And I've used that phrase in, for example, with the NHS in Edinburgh. Not long ago, they looked at their staffing and found that they only had 4 BAME managers. 4. This is the NHS Edinburgh and Lothian. And they asked me to help. And what I did, I went in with the same concept. And what it was that a lot of the BME, these are highly qualified nurses, were failing at interviews. And that's where system consciousness is critical. Because, for example, one young man, his view was, well, why should I wear a uniform to my interviews, or why should I dress as they want me to dress? I'm a hell of a good nurse. And therefore, I should be able to attend an interview in wear what I like. And they couldn't convince him. And I had a chat with him, and I said to him, okay, you're on a plane. You're waiting for the pilot. And this guy comes on wearing a t-shirt, slippers, shorts. And he said, I'm the pilot. The door is open. Would you sit in it still? The point is that you expect the pilot to dress in a particular way. So why can't you understand that's what's expected of you in that situation? And he just said, point taken. The other situation was, this is one of the biggest breweries in Britain at the time. And I went to see the chairman, and the deputy chairman of this big company was also sitting there. And he said, Jeffrey, how are you? I said, fine. And he said, I just interviewed a young man for a directorship. And he said, I said, did you take him? And he said, no, I didn't. And I said, well, why not? He said he was wearing a brown suit. The point is that that company expects you to dress appropriately, in a dark suit at that time was regarded as such. Now, there are other situations in terms of system consciousness where, in fact, these nurses were going for interviews for years. Then there were only 4. And we looked at the system consciousness, not only in terms of the nurses, but also the people conducting the interview. Because they were turning down people, say like Chinese, who has a culture where you don't always look a senior person straight in the face. And people were being turned down because they weren't doing that from that culture, because that meant you were not sort of had confidence and assurance you needed for a manager. Also, people were turned down because of accents. These accents were deemed to be aggressive. And therefore, it is not that one should try and adjust oneself to fit. I'm not talking about that. If one is aware of the nature of the person you're dealing with, then in fact, you are in a position to almost recognize when somebody is trying to fail you. And that is also important. You know, I heard a horrific situation where I was being interviewed recently. And somebody said to me at the interview, you know, oh, by the way, the evidence is that BME professionals don't do as well as white professionals, whether they're doctors, teachers, whatever they're doing. And I said, well, where'd you get that from? And the point is that that view is out there, that somehow BME people are not aware of the expectations of the system and thus are excluded from management roles. And what I did was that we set up a course, and within 3 years, we went from 4 BAME managers to over 20. Over 20. And that course is still being run by the organization. I'm no longer involved. So a situation where BME people were being judged as not capable of being managers, the fact is that they were not aware of the expectations. And especially the interview system is one of the most pernicious places where, in fact, prejudgment is exercised and Black people are excluded from managing within that system. And finally, what I would say is a diverse society requires diverse management to be fair and efficient. And if people are being excluded, and I've said this to senior bankers, finance companies, and lots of other companies, that the fact is you require this diversity in order to make your company efficient. Thank you.
Well, can I say, Sir Geoff, thank you very much for that introduction. I must admit, when Dwain was discussing the topic, and it's a phrase I haven't heard, but you spoke with it with such clarity. It clearly has a meaning. And in a way, what you are saying is really how the society in the UK works, in a way. And what I'd like to ask my fellow panelists, I'd like to get your take on this. In a sense, what do you understand of system consciousness in the UK? So I'd like to get your definition. You know, how does society work? You've heard from Sir Geoff. I hope you've had time to reflect. So, Peter, if I can call on you first, and the reason why I call on you first is your CV, in the sense that you're a business management consultant for over 30 years. So do you get what Sir Geoff is talking about?
I'm in education for over 30 years.
Yeah.
And some years was a business management consultant.
Yeah. So you've been in that arena. So do you get what Sir Geoff is talking about?
Absolutely. I think absolutely 100%. I think one of the things that I found really interesting about what Sir Geoff was talking about was the whole notion of awareness and expectation. Awareness of the environment in which you are operating. I think that for many of us, that could be quite a minefield, irrespective of where we start from. And I think one of the efforts I think that we need to put in, both into individually and collectively, is spending some time to really get to know and understand the environment in which we operate. And irrespective of where we live or where we work, on a personal level, it will pay us back 100% if we spend a little time just getting to know the environment in which we operate and in which we live in. And I think that certainly in terms of looking at the whole, looking at my life and other people's lives, and the degree of success, so-called success, if we want to use that word, that is accorded to people, what the successful people are good at is looking at their environment, looking at the way in which it works, really understanding the expectations of the whole environment or the system, and then employing skills and knowledge and experience and discussion and emotional intelligence to really move forward, because it can be quite a minefield if you're not aware of what's going on. And that whole issue about system awareness, but particularly where I am at the moment in terms of education, is so crucial. And the reason why I say it's so crucial is because that whole environment is a fast-paced, fast-moving, ever-changing, expectations change. And, you know, if you're not used to moving along with that, it could be quite disconcerting. And I'm afraid, I think in the past, in my opinion, less so now, our Black brothers and sisters have fallen foul of that, unfortunately. These are brilliant people in all spheres of life, not only just in education, but everywhere within the United Kingdom. So I think it's, you know, I'm just being quite clear about this. It is actually having the skills to be able to navigate through and become successful, and not only become successful oneself, but also to bring others with you. And I think that's the key mark of leadership, and also in terms of supporting our communities and our modern Black community in the UK. And I think we're all kind of thinking about how can we harness that. I think that's the next step, really.
Yeah, that's once I hear from everyone, that's really going to be the next set of questions. How do we harness that? If I can come to Angela Clarke, because Angela Clarke, who I love dearly, is shaking her head. She's and I want to hear your words of wisdom on this subject.
Well, I would say that what Professor Geoff said about the 50s and the 60s and the difficulties in London and the unrealistic expectations, I actually feel that has kind of followed us through to the present day, really. And I think that's why it's important that we understand the word system consciousness, as you said when you started, Donald, is that it's not something that is widely talked about or even widely spoken about. Even when I heard the title myself, system consciousness, I had to kind of think about, well, what does it actually mean? I know what systems mean, I know what consciousness means, but pull it together, what does it actually mean? And Peter was right, you know, it is about being aware of your environment and knowing your environment. It's so important. You know, I've worked in private sector and public sector, and I would say that this issue around being aware and understanding it so that you can navigate your way through is so important. You know, I for my entire career, let me say, I feel as if I have been a minority, but what Peter says is right, that once you actually know the system and once you actually know how to navigate it, it is important then to kind of bring others along. So going back to where I started, that the issue where, you know, as children we were told that you have to work twice as hard or 3 times as hard, you know, to get to where to be the equivalent of your white counterpart. You know, it doesn't mean that that's gone away, because that is still here. So when I'm talking about this, you know, this unrealistic expectation, it's also as if it still follows us. It still has followed us. And yes, we do have to work twice as hard. I mean, I still, even in the profession that I am now, I still feel that I have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard, you know, and work the long hours to actually probably get the same recognition that someone who works half the hours that I do and maybe has half the number of people to manage. So system consciousness it is about you being aware of your environment, you actually understanding it in all its facets, you know. And it is about feeling, it is about, you know, your emotions, it's around all of those things. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Thank you, Angela. As usual, a voice of clarity and wisdom. Paul, what's your take on what system consciousness means? Yeah, I can hear you. I mean,
yeah, I mean, so Geoff is eloquent as normal, and when I saw the topic, it did kind of make me think, and you know, what exactly does it mean? And I kind of thought about it for a while, and I suppose what might be helpful, given that there are 6 or 7 of us, is for me to give almost like a different perspective. Really, I think it's related. So if you can kind of bear with me, because I think we all kind of understand the need to be, trying to find the right word, competently conscious of how we navigate the system that we live in. I think that, and I say conscious because I think that that's a really important word, competently conscious about how we live our lives. But I thought about it a bit more, and I think some people would probably say that Black people have been doing this for generations. I mean, we've kind of spent generations kind of trying to navigate white space successfully to maintain our well-being. We're almost like shapeshifters, because we have to learn sort of, you know, all the different kind of behaviors that make us more acceptable, and at different times how we use them to deploy them. I've been on that journey myself, having to behave with kind of this dignity and respect in order not to sort of cause outrage and resentment, and sometimes even worse. And I think that we have to acknowledge that these kind of behaviors have been a feature of our lives for generations. I hope it doesn't sound like I'm exaggerating, but that's the way it feels. And I certainly remember when I came in the late 60s and having to learn how to become acceptable. I remembered the SAS laws, having to learn all these kind of behaviors so that I wouldn't be stopped or picked up by police. You know what I mean? You know, so I think that this is something that we do. The problem for me, though, when I thought about it, is that they all tend to be short term. We have to keep doing them repeatedly, but they're short term. So for me, a lot of it is about how we learn to take control of our lives on a more consistent basis. You know, it's the old saying about failing to plan is planning to fail. So when I think about system consciousness, I think Sir Geoff is right. But for me, it's a lot to do with about how we transform our mindset so that we can take control of our lives. All the stuff that Sir Geoff and Peter and Angela said is all part of that. You know, maybe it's about the way you dress. I'll give you an example, Donald. Last year, I was organizing an event called for Black History Month event. And I had some amazing speakers. I managed to persuade people. Leroy, Logan.
Yeah, it's a good event. I was there.
Came. Sir Geoff was there. We had Kwame. And I thought I'd done this great thing, only to be met with a barrage of criticism. Why have you got all these people, or sirs and MBs and OBEs? And I found myself having to spend this time, but people questioning their Blackness, how committed they were, and having to explain that why it's so important. And I think this has to do with about being system conscious. And what I try to explain to a lot of people is that for those people, forget about Benjamin Zephaniah, that's his business, and he's not wrong. Yeah. If you decide to, Howard Gale, you're not wrong if you decide not to take it. Yeah. But for a lot of people, and it took me a while to learn this, they take it in order to open doors. Look what Sir Geoff is doing. Look what you guys are doing. Look what Dwain's doing. And I had to explain this to people, that for some people, this is how it works. For some people, it's self-serving. For others, it's about opening doors so they can make the changes. And it's part of people not understanding those kind of things.
Yeah. Well,
so
you're absolutely right. And I want to, before I comment any further, I want to hear right from Keith and Dwain for their definition. But you've all highlighted some really interesting points. And there's a lot to explore because
I have a bit more to say, but I'll keep my mouth shut. Okay.
but you're right, because part of this is also related to identity, and part of this is also around system consciousness. Is also about how do we define blackness, because in some aspects, people like Sir Geoff and Dwain may be viewed as establishment by our community, right? Because to a certain degree, the definition of blackness is this. And if you do something else, it's like, hold on. But we're going to explore
Well,
this.
let me just finish, Donald.
Yeah, go on.
That the feedback that I got after the session was very positive.
Of course.
And people were surprised. You know, but I'll finish there. You need to move on.
Anyway, Dr. Keith Davidson, what's your definition and what's your understanding of system consciousness?
First, let me just say to Paul, what Paul has brought to the table is what I would say would be the applied part of the discussion. It was bringing this down to the ground floor as to how we manage in that arena, and well done that you were able to educate them, that it came out well, and that's good. Education is always a great tool. I'm quite sure Peter would agree with that too, and maybe all of you. But first, let me thank Sir Geoff for an insightful kind of concept which is brought to us. It's a good concept for us to use as we try to develop ourselves as a community. So I want to thank Sir Geoff for bringing that novel understanding now as to how we, back to a word that's been used quite often so far in the discussion, how we navigate. And I think we really want to thank him for bringing that consciousness to us as to how we can navigate the system. Because so often, many of our folks have failed in the system, not because they are not equipped to serve in the system, but because they didn't possess the tools to navigate. So that's my focus in terms of what you're asking me, what my take on it. I think to navigate the system requires tools. It's not like any sailor. If you're on the sea, you need tools to navigate the ocean. And it's a treacherous ocean that we are confronted with at times. So many issues, racism, other things. But we need tools to navigate that. And I think that those tools will help us, or people, to develop the confidence, because I think based on what Sir Geoff has said earlier on, the folks who were not in the managerial areas of the, I think it was the health service he was talking about. And that's so true. Many of our professionals languish around at the middle management area and have not progressed further. And it seems to me that they required tools. And it was fitting, I think that's, again, I'm stressing the focus, that he was able to equip them through lectures with the kind of tools that will help them to become confident and to be able to serve in a system that they were equipped to serve, but maybe hadn't had the confidence to do so. So in a way, I'm trying to say, Donald, that this concept requires tools. And some of the essential ones would be knowledge. If you're going to be navigating the ocean of, you need some knowledge of what requires on the sea. And I think Peter mentioned that too, and so I concur with him. You need the skills to navigate.
Yeah.
And you need, and I think Peter also talked about emotional intelligence. I think that's something I think is also very useful, because it's how you feel. Emotions about feelings. And if you are able to demonstrate that you're sensitive about feelings, that's another tool that can help you to progress. Information, I think we talked about that already. We need information, and I think in a conversation with Dwain, to get information, one thing that we need to do is to read widely. And if any of you read Michelle Obama's book, Becoming.
Absolutely, fantastic book.
Yes, one of the things that she brought to at least my attention was that, she loved her husband and so forth, but sometimes he was not nearby, because she called it his hole. It was in his hole, his little hole, where we did a lot of reading. And I think that really made the man. You need to be abreast of what's happening around you. So so those are the tools I'm thinking that we need to be focused on. In summary, the skills that I think Peter talked about, that we need these tools of skills, knowledge, information, being sensitive to be able to navigate in that emotional context. All these things will make us then become more confident, because I think a lot of times our people fail, or brothers and sisters fail, because they lack the confidence. But if you have the tools, you become more assured. So I'll pause here, Donald, and say it's about tools.
Okay.
Build confidence, because I believe our people have the wherewithal to do it, but they need these tools to help them.
You stumble. You're coming up to my next question, so you've stolen a bit of my thunder.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to get Dwain to give his definition or his understanding of what he means by systems consciousness, and just to get you thinking of how we're going about this. Once you've heard from Dwain about what his definition is, the question I'd like to ask all of us: do we think the folks in our community have a grasp of what we're talking about? So let's hear from Dwain first, and then I want to ask each of you, having heard everyone's definition, do the folks in our community get that? But firstly, Dwain, let's get your thoughts on your understanding of systems consciousness.
Thank you, Donald, for the opportunity to respond to that question about what system consciousness means to us. I believe it's a powerful question for us all to address, because it will mean different things to different people dependent on your life experiences and your broad awareness of what's happening in the country. But I've only got 4, maybe 5 small points to make to actually share my understanding of it, and each one will be brief. I grew up in a household where both my mother and father would say to us, a man must know, have, and can do. And I grew to understand that they were saying to us, we must know about as many different things as possible. As we encounter them, if we don't understand them, we must find out. So there was a definite expectation that we shouldn't sit back in ignorance. That's the know part. A man must have. That was very much saying to us, you need to be in a position to be able to fund yourself, resource yourself. You shouldn't be the sort of person going around simply with your hand outstretched, begging from others to resource whatever it is you want to do in your life. You must be able to generate that income for yourself. And a man must be able to do. And that was basically the reminder that it's not just enough to know, it's not just enough to have money, it's also important to know how to get things done. Some people refer to it as being able to get around. And that was certainly the message that I heard repeatedly as I was growing up. And so we weren't encouraged to sit around and feel sorry for ourselves. If we didn't know, the expectation was we'd go and find out. And that would be the first challenge from my parents. You're asking this question, but what have you done to try and find out about it? And that was the steady challenge. And equally, what have you done about trying to find out how to do it? Now, happy to have the conversation was my parents' response, but tell me what you've done to try and find out how to do it. So a man must know, must have, and can do is something that has been with me for decades. The other phrase which I came across as I got older was, for anyone new to the United Kingdom, typically it takes about 10 years before you understand how the UK works in order to function effectively in it. 10 years. And I didn't actually challenge that or question it, but the more I look at people and where they are, I can then say whether they've used those 10 years effectively or not. Because I have a lot of friends who are new migrants to this country, whether they're from Eastern European or some other overseas setup. And within that 10-year window, many of them are getting around and are functioning and understand how this country works. But sadly, like many folks have said already, there are many of us who have lived in this country for 30 or 40 years, and they're not functioning with the same high level. And that's to do with the mindset that they have brought to living in this country. The other point I want to make, which again was a nudge from my family, my parents were very clear that the Jamaica Patois or Creole, call it whichever you will, both have been used, is fine for wherever in the Caribbean you're from, because that's like the local way of speaking. But my parents were very clear, if we've decided to make the UK our home, we have to be able to use standard British English effectively. And that was one of the reasons why they bought the TV, black and white, back in those days, you know, early 60s and so forth. And we were encouraged to watch the TV, not because we were just looking for the foolishness, but we were encouraged to watch the TV to listen to how language was being used. And we were expected after a while to use the English language in those ways. So I'm always surprised when we have folks from the same part of the world as our family, and they really don't know the language of the country in which they live for ages. And my parents were quite clear about why language matters. If we are going to progress in this environment, language is one of the things that we need to master and be able to use effectively. I would nod to what Keith has said about having the tools. But another thing to do with the system consciousness is very quickly, we worked out that if you were going to make progress in the UK, you needed to embrace qualifications. In fact, after about 19, most of the people who understood that didn't put it in those terms. They said, we live in a qualification society. There was the implicit assumption that when they used that description of the UK, people in the know got it. I certainly got it, but I know an awful lot of other people were confused when the term qualification society was used. And my last point really is around understanding the attitude of others from outside of our community. Because part of understanding the system in this country is taking the time to understand how people not in your community look at your community. Because that's part of the tools as well, that's part of the knowledge. So you can anticipate perverse behavior from those sources. But if you really don't have an understanding of how they're coming at your community, every day will be a surprise. Why is that person talking to me like this? Why is this person expecting this of me? Da, 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 da. I've only been here 50 years. Why are they doing this? So, you know, system consciousness in about all of those things. What have we learned in the time that we've lived in a country that we've chosen to make our home? Because if we're not learning, then we can't function in it. That's my take.
Thank you, Dwain. I remember at the start, Dwain said it's going to be brief, but but he's still. Actually, Dwain, you know, you make me laugh. I was just reflecting when he talked about black and white TV. So I'm going to show my age because I also had a black and white TV. I watched Star Trek, but back in the day, I know most folks from the Caribbean, they used to watch the 9 o'clock news, and this is how I got into Question Time, because my parents used to watch Question Time. I don't know if you remember Robin Day.
Yes.
Absolutely, Robin Day.
Yes.
With his flashy bow tie. I still watch Question Time to this day, and University Challenge, because they were the programs my particularly my dad got me to watch, and it's so funny. So thank you all for your definition of system consciousness, and it's almost a bit saying the lay of the land, so to speak, if I heard you correctly. And it's something Angela said. Well, you've all touched on this, and the question I want to ask is, do you think folks in our community get this? Do you think they are aware of this? And to give you kind of a clue, or to get you thinking about this question, Angela mentioned something to me which I've heard in many homes. You got to work twice as hard or 3 times as hard. So to a certain degree, maybe they were aware of it. They may not have been able to articulate it, but perhaps they are aware of it in a way. I don't know, but I'll start with you first, Angela. Do you think our community is generally aware? They may not say come up with a definition of system consciousness, which you've all articulated, but do you think they are aware of the lay of the land? As Dwain said, we've been here for a significant period of time. Have we learnt how to navigate? Because I still remember my parents and many others talk about, you've got to get that piece of paper.
Yeah, I hear that, Donald, and I was going to say that it really does concur with what Dwain did say, because when I talked about my parents saying you've got to work twice or 3 times as hard, certainly they already knew that it was a qualification society. They knew it, and so when they talked to us, it was about studying hard. It was about you know, right from the time that we were at school, it was making sure that we did our homework, that we listened, all of that. I remember my mum particularly used to say to my brothers, you don't want to come out like a dunce, so you make sure that you stop. No, seriously. And it was almost a mantra for us, for all of us. And so even though I said that, you know, that what Professor Geoff said is right, that, you know, from the 50s and the 60s, things have carried through. I feel that even irrespective of that, in spite or despite that, there were our parents, many of our parents who already knew, they were aware, they were conscious of the systems, they were conscious of what was going on. My mum, I remember my mum, when she went into nursing, she saw the situation that the black nurses were pushed into the auxiliary nursing as opposed to the registered nursing, and she used to tell us those things. So those are examples of the systems then and how it was, and she shared that with us to say, look, you know, if you want to be a cleaner, if you want to whatever, then, you know, that's up to you, but I'm saying to you that don't, you know, do better than I did, do, you know, study so that you can achieve more than I did. And for me, and that's what I did, and I studied, and in the hope that my children would follow suit. So I've passed that on to my children. So you're saying, does the society know? Does community know? Yes, I think they are aware, but it's how they interpret it, you know, that's important. Because some will say that systems are set up to deliberately break Black people. That's some people, you know, that's how. But others will say, you know, the systems are there. We know that they are there. Find out how they operate. Find out how, and you know, that word navigate is so important. You know, because as Keith said, he touched on it. You need to have the tools to do it. But there's no point in, you can't know what tools that you need unless you understand your environment, unless you understand, you know, the system. What do I need to navigate? What tools, what skills, what education do I need? You know, I remember in the 80s, going back to the 80s, there were books that used to say, if you want to be an engineer, this is the steps that you need to take. This is what you need to do. And they were doing that from when you were young. So if you wanted your career path, you knew what steps you needed to take to get there. So you could navigate your way through. But I'm not sure. I'm not saying that doesn't exist in the education system now. I'm sure it does. But you know, it's whether people are as conscious about the realities and the fact that you do need to do that in this day and age, and that's what it means. You know, the qualification society is the key to get to an advance and to get to where you need to get to, but it's understanding those words and those concepts.
Thank you. Peter, we're touching on education. So do you think our community and, you know, the modern Black community, do you think they understand systems consciousness? So if we take education as an example, and if we look at the level of attainment, they're improving, don't get me wrong, but there's still a worrying number. Are our community aware of this and how to navigate, so to speak?
I think our community has got better in terms of the awareness of what's been happening, particularly in the education system. Whereas before in the education system, there was an element of, we know something wrong is happening, but we're not quite sure what's going on. But there was a sense of, from the Black community, probably 40 years ago, that, you know, perhaps, you know, there is something, but we're not quite sure about it. Now, this particular Black community in which we live and work, the modern Black community, are better equipped. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I've worked up and down London for many years and outside London, and meeting the Black community and Black parents, they have a better understanding of what is happening to their children within the system and know what to do about it. I'm not saying every single parent or family knows what to do, but it's getting better. Having said that, the education system, as I said before, like a lot of context, is fast moving, it's fast paced, and things change really quickly. And we got a glimpse of that during the pandemic, where there was an opportunity for certain organizations or certain schools in certain contexts to perhaps look unfavorably at how Black students have been performing. Now, obviously, hopefully we're coming out of that particular context. So what I'm saying is that the question that I have is whether or not we as a group, we as a people, Black parents, Black teachers, Black students, whether or not we are equipping ourselves to come through this major change that we've gone through and now coming out of that. And I think that's a big challenge for all of us, a big challenge for parents, big challenge for professionals, big challenge for community leaders. How are we equipping ourselves because we know that the system is changing. This is the key thing. We know that it's changing, but okay, what do we do about it? And these types of discussions in different contexts, but particularly these type of discussions are really important, because I think that we do have to step back, stop, think strategically about where we're going to go next. Big question, big answer to you, yes, I think that families are aware. Yes, the parents are aware, but the context is really bubbly at the moment. And I think the challenge, the key challenge is, how do we, on an individual and a collective basis, move forward, particularly with regards to a system or an awareness of the system that's changing fast. And that's a major, major challenge. And I think that one of the things that we need to do better, and I think we are doing better, is looking and working together and then moving together collectively, so that we can start, looking at different approaches so that our young children and our children and everybody else moves forward positively. And that's
Donald,
a major challenge.
Can I make a request, Donald?
Yeah, certainly.
That we call on Sir Geoff at this stage, just to get his take on this.
No, not exactly. That was my next. I was going to get Sir Geoff to comment on that, because he's heard folks talk about the definition. I wanted a couple of people to speak about if our community is aware of systems consciousness. And now I'm going to go back to Sir Geoff to see his take on it, both the definition and also my question, Sir Geoff, in terms of, do you think our community, have a grasp on what you initially defined?
Yeah, thanks, Donald. Yeah, in fact, what has been said, all of it has been extremely relevant. Relevant in the sense that the society expects you to have qualifications. And therefore, if you don't have them, then you are going to fail within a system that expects that. But there are also subtleties in terms of how do you react to the attitude of the system. And I'll give you one example, because I think examples are clear in terms of people can see what you're getting at. I remember a young man, I was at an interview myself, and there was a young man, white, went in for his interview, and when he came out, he was very upset. And this is a white guy with a first-class honours degree in chemistry from Cambridge. And he went in, and when he came out, I saw him and he looked very depressed. I said, what happened at the interview? And he said, do you know, I went in and the guy, a senior politician, asked me what was the chemical composition of dirt. Now, one has to be system conscious in that situation. Do you react because you think you're being insulted with a first-class honours degree from Cambridge? Or do you quickly work out he's trying to push you? And how do you answer that? And therefore, to me, that's a very significant aspect about being system conscious, is one has a system, and that if one is going to manage it, then in fact one is being assessed or being pushed. And what Paul says is also important, because if one is system conscious, then one has to not only think of the guys with the qualifications, but also the guys who are going to criticize you, because that's part of being system conscious. So it is a way of behaving that in many ways can transcend race. It's about, if one is in Nigeria or Jamaica, one has to be system conscious about the Jamaican Nigerian system. And therefore, I would like our children not only to know the expectations that you don't go through red lights and you go through green lights, but if I say to you, what do you do about amber? The point is that a policeman may stop you on amber, what do you say? What do you do? And therefore, to me, system conscious is about, it's about qualifications, it's about meeting the system in terms of the expectations, but there are also the subtleties, which I regard as, we could, because we're in Europe, or we can call them Eurocentric. And therefore, though that awareness and being able to manage it is an important part of system consciousness.
Thank you, Sir Geoff. Sadly, you know what I'm thinking about? The composition of dirt.
The right answer, Donald, in my view, is that he was being pushed, and he was being asked to use his lateral intelligence to show how he approaches that. Because as we all know, dirt is not just one compound or element.
Exactly,
There's
it's
a variety
a mixture
of things in it. And what he was being asked is, can you unpack what goes into dirt? But he chose to be offended because he saw, oh, dirty, naughty stuff, which I would want to avoid. He was insulting me. So there was a guy rightly should not have been hired because he's an idiot. It doesn't matter about his first degree. He didn't get it.
He didn't get it.
But that's my
true.
view.
Yeah, it's mostly carbon if I still remember my chemistry.
Yeah, but there's a lot of silicon in there as well.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
You know,
there could be anything.
Yeah, it could be. You realize, Angela, scientists are now taking over. That's
definitely.
No. But it's a question which didn't have a chemical answer.
Yeah.
Correct.
And he was trying to see, therefore, what you would react. So if somebody says something to you which is silly, that's a very important thing, because you'll be working with a lot of people who may say those things. How do you respond to them?
Correct.
How do you treat them?
Yeah.
And thus that was a very clever approach, which we must learn.
People. Absolutely. And we've got to know how to navigate our way around a lot of silly people.
Yeah.
So
And so Geoff, I like the point you made about awareness.
Yeah.
So I want to ask Paul and Keith and Dwain to follow on from Sir Geoff, and to keep the discussion going about, does the modern Black community have a grasp of systems consciousness? Do you think, and Peter's right, I think maybe in education, I would argue, I think there is this awareness now. Unfortunately, not enough Black parents are governors, but we'll come to that. But to get your take on it, initially, Paul, do you think our community is aware? So education, yes, but what about areas of employment? What about law and other aspects of British society? Do you think we're aware?
Well, I've just briefly done. I agreed. I recognize a lot of what Dwain and Angela were saying. I mean, certainly with my mom was very aware and drilled it into all of us about what we needed to do in terms of the way we dressed, the way we presented ourselves, and the way we spoke. And I mean, that was all part of it. So I think the answer is almost certainly, I think, yes. With my kind of diversity and inclusion hat on, I think that, and I'm trying to stick with my theme of giving a different perspective. One of the things is when you do this job, and I was talking to somebody because I'm doing this project at the moment, was part of how we navigate this system, I think, is how we help people who are victims to navigate the system. You have a lot of us, and all of us have actually been through it. One of the things you notice with a lot of successful Black people is that they've dealt with it. It doesn't become an obstacle. They've used it. It's partly what Angela was saying about how you interpret things. It becomes a motivation to them to succeed. If you try and hold me back, and the harder you try, is the harder I'm going to work to actually make sure that I make it. But there is almost like a powerlessness. I was talking to this person who's made a complaint, and lack of control. And I don't like to say this, but he'd actually made himself a victim. And there I was at the end of the thing saying to myself, pull yourself together. This is a bright guy, university graduate, but he's been consumed with his experience of racism and discrimination. And there isn't anybody that can help him to navigate and to think his way through that particular process. And I find that certainly, and I'm talking in terms of employment, it's a huge issue because most of the issues that I deal with, Donald, are still employment-related issues.
Yeah.
So
well, employment is the big thing, isn't it? I mean,
well, Dwain would know when he was at the commission, it was the biggest division because that was where most of it happened. So I actually think that there is that kind of, there's a huge issue around helping people, even after all this time, to deal with that issue in terms of how you navigate it, because we've all been there, we've all been through it, and we've come out the other side, and we continue to deal with it. But I will tell you this, Donald, I'm sorry, a lot of people can't deal with it. And that is a problem, and they don't have a mechanism for dealing with it. You know, a lot of the people that they go to, in some cases, maybe the trade unions, Angela would know about this stuff, they're not actually helping them to deal with those kind of issues anyway. So it's become, I'm sorry to go on about it, it's become like a frustration of mine because I'm still dealing with people who are in that space, who are highly qualified, have been to school, they've been to university, but they're trapped in this kind of environment, and they can't think their way out of it because there's nobody for them to go and say, to give them advice and to help them navigate through that process. It is a big issue, so I'm sorry to bang on about it.
No, employment is a big. I want to get Keith and Dwain, and then I've seen heads nodding, so I want to make sure everyone has to get their points across. But and I'm conscious of time because we've just done an hour, and I do want us to at least discuss solutions as well. So Keith, if you can spend a couple of minutes, and then Dwain, about awareness in our community.
Right. Thank you, Donald. I want to focus on three groups then in our community that this awareness we'll have to work with them on. The first group is our children. We need to start with our children. We got to help them to get the concept of the qualification society, but we know from our own experiences, we are parents ourselves, that children are not always on focus in a way on the long term. They're looking at the short term, and so our challenge as parents is to get our children to start to think long term, think about investment rather than consuming now. And I talk about consuming in a broad way. They have time and they want to enjoy themselves, etc. That's a bit of consuming rather than investing. And so we got to, I won't labor the point too much because I think you get the message I'm saying. We got to help them to invest rather than consume now in terms of their time and enjoyment and so forth. They want to have fun now. Generally, they want to have fun. We are teachers, some of us are teachers. And in evening classes, they want to have fun. But we got to get them to invest now. That's part of the strategy, I think. We've got to work with our children to see the benefit of really investing in education themselves. We can't always we're telling them about education. We encourage them about education, but we got to get them to be conscious that is a great investment, education. That's my first point, number one. Number two, the second group would be our older folks, those who have left universities into the job market and so forth, etc. Some are skilled workers, some are professionals. And I think what they need to do is to invest too, to become excellent in what they're doing and be experts. Because if they are, they're going a long way to address some of the issues that they contend with many times in the work area. And I think, I don't know if any of you have read this book, The Outliers. Anyone read that?
Absolutely, Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes, and what he talked about, there are many things he talked about, but I remember the 10,000 hours concept. If you really want to get your head around an area of work or whatever it is, you got to do 10,000 hours. Okay, it sounds mathematical. I'm not really wanting to say we should be mathematical. It's a principle that you need to understand. You need to know what you're doing, build your strength, understand your job, be an expert. Because I believe that if you're an expert, people come to you. You don't have to go to them. They come to you. And being an expert, you got to believe in the concept of being excellent in what you're doing. And number three, the third group. So just to recap, the children, workers and professionals, etc. But we come to the third group I want to focus on, and that is the community in a larger way. And what it can do, and many are trying to do that, Reach Society is doing it also, is to give support within the community. What Reach is doing in terms of role modeling, in terms of even this program here, Meet the Experts, you're putting out ideas to the community for them to engage with those ideas and to see the need of bringing support in our community. It doesn't just come by talking. So it's the doing part I'm talking about. Whatever you may be engaged in, I may be engaged in something different, but whatever we're focused on, it is to make a difference in our community. Are we making a difference in our community? I believe there are many doing that. And I again say Reach is a good example of trying to make a difference in the community. It's about giving support to the concept of helping us to understand and to be conscious and to navigate the system. So that's my take on it, those three areas, Donald.
Thank you, Keith. Dwain,
do you want me
from
to come in?
Geoff,
Thanks,
awareness.
Donald. I'm very happy to come in on the back of this in terms of do we believe that the modern Black community understands system consciousness? And I have no doubt in my mind that, you know, it's a bit like the curate's egg. Some of us do, some of us don't. And if I had to actually draw a line, I would say a majority of us don't understand it and a smaller proportion do. So on that Pareto basis, 80-20, 20% of us appear to understand it. Why do I say that? Because that 20% is forging a path forward and are doing very well. Here is where my 80% comes from. If we have a community that still disproportionately has people working in lower income jobs, the range of experiences they're going to have through their employment will be finite and limited. And if they're not doing many other things outside of those low paid jobs, the range of learning that they're going to have will be finite and limited. And for that very simple reason, their usefulness to their children, who perhaps should be looking to them to learn from them, there ain't going to be a lot of learning coming in their direction because their parents just won't know enough about how the system works in this country. And I can tell you, my lived experience tells me that as ambitious as my parents were, they did not know the half of what I've come to know in the time I've lived here. And where is the proof of that? My children were positioned in such a better way because of my experience, my wife's experience, and we were able to open doors for our children and give them advice about a variety of things which have come directly from things we've learned and observed and held on to and have passed on. So, talk about education. I survived a rubbish secondary school, but as I was giving that talk to Transport for London today, I told them I survived it because I held on to all the things that I needed to do despite the systemic racism in my school and all the children headbanging with the teachers. I did my very best to duck and dive around all of those bigoted teachers because I did not want my education to be undermined or disrupted. However, We then took a decision about the caliber of school for our children, which said, the state system hasn't changed enough. We need a better option. That's why they went to independent schools. That's why they had different experiences. That's why they easily got into university. But it didn't stop there. We programmed our children into a wide range of activities throughout their lives, because what we knew was important were those character building activities that they needed to be into from the moment they were born, so that they would see the wide range of differences and behaviors in our society, which they could not get purely from our family environment or our friends. So we didn't do those activities because we were stupid. We did it because we wanted them to understand and learn about the country in which they were born. And, you know, as much as I was saying this to Donald when we were talking about system consciousness, I said, I embargoed my children going to any university in London, not because I disregarded University of London, because it's a prestigious university, but they grew up in London. And I wanted them to discover other parts of the United Kingdom. One of the really big benefits of that is my children by 18, 19 had no fear of traveling anywhere around the country or anywhere across the world. And so before they were 25, a couple of them had been to parts of Africa, a couple of them had been to parts of the Far East. I mean, continental Europe is like their backyard because they're in and out of continental Europe as if they're playing. My point is to help them to realize that they need to be able to make a go of any and all those situations begins early by the sort of exposure you give them. So education is not just about getting the qualifications, it's about understanding that you never stop learning. Socializing is not just about which mates you're sending text messages to or exchanging foolishness. It's about doing a wide range of things which gives you exposure. Relationship building with a variety of people, not just the ones close to your family or your friends. So one of the things I can tell you, my children are absolute experts at interacting with children of every ethnicity in this country. Why? Because they went to school with that wide range. They had friends who were from that wide range. So they were never fooled by people from different ethnic groups who presented baloney to them. So the whole, you know, do we understand as a community system consciousness? Only in part. The challenge is how do we make the 80-20 flip? So the majority of families in our community get it and we can help each generation. Right now, I think we're pushing a stone uphill. And that's why we see a lot of what we're seeing today.
Okay, thank you, Dwain. Again, stolen my thunder, but it's all right because I realize it's, I don't know how long we've been going, but we've gone way over the hour.
Okay.
But Dwain's touched on a couple of points that I want everyone to speak about. And I want to give each of you a couple of minutes each. And it's one, I want to phrase it in two parts, if I may. What do you think are the solutions? And what do you think roles of family and the impact and the importance of family? The reason why I say that, because when I heard about what Angela said and what Paul and others have said, and I know about Sir Geoff, it seems that the reason why you guys are where you are is because of your parents in some way, shape or form kind of guided you. I may have got that wrong, but that blueprint is what Dwain has carried forward to his children. So I have two questions. Firstly, Dwain's talking about 80-20. I mean, we could debate that. That's a bit harsh, I must say. But how do we build awareness of system consciousness? And what does the role of the family play in that? I don't know who wants to go first. Peter.
Just listening there, I mean, I listened very, very carefully to what Dwain said, and it just reminds me of that phrase, that African phrase, Ubuntu, okay? And, you know, when I was growing up, I could not step onto one pavement without my uncle or my aunt or somebody knowing what I'd done, who, what, and where. And I think that for me, that was really important. You know, it takes a village, you know, to raise one person. And I think that we, in many respects, we've got to maybe go back to an aspect of that. And, you know, we have all of these wonderful organizations. The family is really important. The wider family is also important. But now I suspect that parts of that or expectations of that is now changing. So one of the things that I want to say is that we've got to find a way, and I think we are doing it with our respective groups, respective society, the Reach Society. We've got to find a way where we bring all of that together, we harness that, and I think it could take time, but we do it in phases where that 80%, where we try and reach as much of that 80% as we can in order to bring up that 20% that Dwain is talking about. And we have all of these wonderful groups. We've had quite wonderful meetings with different types of groups with respect to health, education, business, mental health. You know, we've got already within the Reach Society those wonderful groups. And I think it's how do we therefore harness the groups even more in order to ensure that we try to reach as many of these parts as possible. There are lots of community organizations. Attached to those community organizations are professionals, people with great experience, mums, dads, everybody. And I think, as I said before, it is how do we harness all of that? Certainly within education, there are groups that are happening, that are forming out both within schools, but also attached to schools as well. And I think the key thing is, you know, how do we bring all of that together? How do we start? I'm just making the 2 minutes really, really short.
No, absolutely brilliant. No, you kept the time. Who would like to go next? The role of family, and widen it, because it is the community, and it's coming up with solutions.
I'll go next.
Yes.
I had a conversation with my son this week, in fact, where he said to me, we were talking, and he was describing his day at work, and he said to me that for the first time he was consciously aware of the fact that he was actually going into a meeting where he kind of noticed his blackness and felt that he was aware of it, and felt that when he went into this meeting, because it was so critical as to whether he got a deal or not, he went in thinking that his color would go against him. And he said he hadn't felt like that before. But he went in and he was dressed in a suit because that's how he is, and he went in. But he said to me that he noticed that he was going over and above. He felt that he was actually going over and above to say the right things, to act in the right way. And I say that because it just reminded me of what Dwain said about, you know, speaking properly, language, how language is important, how you dress, and those kind of things. And it's not just about that. That issue around skin color is so important. You know, when you're going into an environment that is all white and you have to prove yourself, you're right. You do need to kind of have that almost resilience, knowledge, and understanding of your environment, but also know how to conduct yourself. And it's not just about being professional, because you're professionals on this platform. But when you have the knowledge of your subject, when you know your job, when you know what you're doing, it's not a pretense. You're going in there with some level of authority. So I feel that, you know, that for me, it kind of says that, yes, when you have that knowledge, when you are educated to the extent that you can command a situation, it makes you feel more confident. You have that resilience. again, what Peter said, when we touched on school governors and that there aren't enough of them, I agree. There are not enough school governors, but I also think it's about the fact that maybe we need to raise awareness about what it entails. What does it mean to become a school governor? People come from the perspective that they can't. Well, actually, let's reverse that and say, yes, you can. There are so many things that we stop ourselves from doing just because we have a perception of the fact that, oh, you know, it's a board table and I'm going to be in a minority. Well, you know, let's educate, let's do that supporting that we're talking about. You know, a lot of my role right now is spent supporting people to act appropriately, because sometimes they act so inappropriately because they don't understand the system, because they don't get it, because they don't understand that actually, yes, this is being done to challenge, or this is being done to check, or this is they're just, you know, they act in a different way. So for me, the whole issue, you know, that supportive bit is so important. Our interpersonal skills and how we relate to people, as Dwain said, is fundamentally important, because that, you know, they say that you are judged within seconds of when you actually meet someone, just like when you're going into an interview situation. You know,
so Angela, what, just because as being the only female, and I'll give you a little bit more time, but you said something, and I wanted to get your take on this.
Okay.
Others, don't worry, you will come. I'll ask you for your solutions, but I want to ask you this, Angela, only because I was in the meeting. The reason why, it was an all Black women's meeting, brilliant discussion, and a number of them were saying this: you need to be your authentic self. You need to be your authentic self, which I think is great. But I'm thinking, as you're saying, if it's inappropriate behavior, I sort of worry. I don't.
But it's what your authentic self is, because it's interesting. I have used that term. In fact, I think even this week I have used that term to say that, you know, I want to model behavior. I want people to model behavior, and I want to certainly behave in a way that people can see as an example of how to behave. I'm not saying that people have to look, dress, or speak like me, but understand that there is a way of doing things in the environments in which you live. If you're in Jamaica, if you're in Africa, and yes, of course, speak in your native tongue, do what you do. But when you are here and in environments where you need to be understood, make sure that you are clear. Make sure that you know, it's not about playing the game, because again, you hear people say, well, I'm not playing the game. Well, it's not a game. You know, if this is your livelihood and this is where you want to progress, you need to understand it, and then you need to get in line. So yeah, authentic self, important to be your authentic self. Yes, I do believe so. I feel that I am able to be my authentic self, but that's because, you know what, I do take time to study my environment. I take time to know who I'm working with, and even when I see the pitfalls, when I see the negative behavior, I know how to deal with it. You know, I know how to deal with it, and I know how to navigate around it. But I also know, as a leader, how to inform knowledge, you know, and actually give instruction, give guidance. Whether if they want to take it or not, that's entirely up to them. But that's my role. That, as a leader and a good leader, my role is to impart my experience, knowledge, and to also ensure that they model behavior.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Paul next. Solutions, but Angela and Peter, we'll have to have another chat offline, because I've been a chair of governors of a school for 7 years, and my time is up. And so I've got all this knowledge that I want to impart and to get more Black governors. But we'll have another chat another time. But Paul, solutions.
I think we all part of the solution, I think, in a way, Donald. I hope you don't mind me saying that. I think that I was quite inspired by what Dwain said, because not all of it, but some of it was familiar by what, you know, to me, in terms of what we've achieved in our family coming from Jamaica. It's an amazing achievement. And, you know, sometimes I wonder, you know, I'm like everybody else. I've been trying to do more for 40 years, but it's tiring. You know, it's really, really, really hard. My own view is that, and I've said this before, I think on several occasions when we've had this, is that we need to have a unifying consciousness about what it is that means to be Black in a modern British society. And we don't have one. And I kind of feel that we're still wrestling with that. Is part of the problem. But for me, I think the solution lies in what Dwain and some of his friends try to do with the call. And I think Peter has touched on it, that there are lots and lots and lots of groups doing, highly intelligent people doing lots and lots and lots of stuff, but it's not coordinated. There's a bit, this is part of the problem that we actually have. If you look at all the other groups, and I was listening to a counsellor speak the other day, and she was really saying, you know, you have to become governors, you have to become governors. And I didn't realize at the time that I was making up my face. She said to me afterwards, you were making up your face. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. She said, why was you doing that? And I said to her, why? It's not as simple as asking people to become governors. Why do you want them to become governors? She said, what do you mean? I said, you never spoke about why you wanted them to go. What is it that you want? Why do you want them to become governors? And what it is that they want to change? Because I know from my experience, and Dwain would know this, and I've been to, I don't go anymore, but many local authorities, I used to go to the meetings. I used to go to meetings, and there were people in there from certain groups who could hardly speak a word in English. I knew why they were there. They are thinking strategically. They were aware of the system. They were utilizing the system to find a way to help people in their community. That's what I said to her. That's actually what they were doing. And the part of the problem that we have, and I don't know if it's 80-20, is that we haven't got that. We still don't get it in terms of what needs to be done. But I think it's possible because, this is where I agree with Peter. I've met, thankfully, and more recently as well, some extraordinary Black people. Some of it has been through Reach. There are some extraordinary Black people in this country doing some extraordinary things. And that's what's motivated me and kept me going. So I think the solution lies within us, as Peter said, forming a way to work in a more cohesive way. A bit like you have, Dwain would often say, the British Board of Deputies, the Hindus have their own groups, the Sikh have their own groups. We need to put our tensions and our differences to one side, because I actually think it's the solutions. We need to concentrate on what it is that we have in common. And we have lots and lots and lots in common. It's just about us finding a way in which we can harness the skills and the qualities that are in this community. And it's a belief system. We've got to believe that. I think Dwain touched on his kids have found out, like my kids have found out, that a lot of other groups is a lot of baloney. But we've fallen for it and believe that we're somehow inferior to all these other groups. And I don't actually believe all that stuff. But these are the kind of barriers that I think that we actually need to actually begin to kind of break down.
Yeah.
But all of us and what we're doing, and I think Keith touched on it, and what we're doing, this is all part of the solution.
Yeah.
But it's going to take time.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Thank you, Paul. Before we hear from Keith, Dwain, and I'm going to let Sir Geoff have the last word. I also want to praise you, Paul, and particularly the Enfield Caribbean Association. You probably won't remember this, but you asked me to come up there a few years ago, and I met some young people. But what was really impressed me most, one summer, you took a whole host of kids to the Science Museum. I thought that was brilliant, because what you were doing, it's not just taking them to the Science Museum, but that's also part of what Dwain is saying about being aware. And because I got the Science Museum, I used to work around Imperial, so I used to go there all the time. And what started worrying, I never saw as many Black kids as I think we should.
Yeah,
because
I had a problem. I used to take my kids as well.
Yeah, and so I rate what you guys were doing. So I just want to mention that. Keith,
your 2 minutes on solutions.
Yes, thank you, Donald. Yes, I take your second question, I think, as I wrote them down. How do we build awareness? That's I want to take that first. I want to suggest it starts with us as individuals. If I must be the first disciple on this matter, I must be upfront. I should be able to influence those around me. So it starts with me as an individual, influencing those who I am in touch with, or in my spheres of influence. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of building awareness, I think families, how do we get them? Because that's a basic unit in a society. If we can somehow get families to understand and to be aware of some of the things we're talking about, then it will go a good way. So how do we get into families? It's pretty difficult, I must say. We have got a sort of network of family around to be a tool to get to them. The nearest I think we can get to them will be through churches, because many of them go to church. And so if we can work with churches, then we can get them to be more aware through parenting programs, information about the system, as we've been talking about, how to navigate the system. So churches can be a useful avenue to get to parents and for them to develop the skills of parenting, etc. We talk about, I think, Paul has really talked about organizations, and I think I agree with what have been done by the call concept. I think it's a great one. If you look at the Jewish community, they have a system whereby I think every 6 weeks they meet. All Jewish groups, they meet, and they're not dictating, but they're sharing information. And by sharing information, others can go away with new tools, new things to consider in terms of building their community. So organizations, if we can find ways to work and to be involved with other organizations, surely that's a way of building the awareness. I think Angela touched on the matter of behavior. I think he was answering the question about being yourself. I think it's a psychological issue that we have to address, and it comes back to the individual. A lot of baggage we carry, and how do we get rid of those baggages? It's a challenge, and it comes from maybe more education in terms of building self-esteem, self-confidence, etc. Many times our people are intimidated by the other side. And how you get that will require some more thinking. But how do you break that psychological barrier that has been pulling us back is an issue. So I only have 1 minute left, so I can't deal with that so much. And so to answer the other question, how do we break, I think, what is a vicious circle? And for me, it has been shown that education has been the thing that has broken many barriers. You have a lot of great people who didn't come from the middle class. They've done wonderful things in society. What made a difference? Education. So I'm sure Peter would agree with that, and many of you. I'm in that field to education. I believe that education is one way of breaking that vicious circle. There are other things too. We can promote enterprise and so forth. But I believe if you promote education, it gives young people and adults too the tools to navigate better. So those are my take on it. Donald, awareness through a range of things we could do with families, churches, etc. groups. Start with us, first of all, and in summary, how to break that vicious circle. Education, education, education.
Thank you. You must be listening to Tony Blair's speech. Education.
No, I said it before him.
Yeah,
I love
Donald,
Keith.
if I can come in here on the
Yes.
back of what Keith has said, education sounds fine, but I would modify what Keith has said by saying it's the application of the learning that makes the difference, because there is a cohort of people in our community who stack up the qualifications but never do a damn thing with it. And so for me, it's not just being educated, it's about applying that education and using it, and not just using it in the subject that you have become qualified in, but using it in areas outside of that. And I just give myself as the simplest example to make the point. All of you on this call will know that I have a PhD, but maybe only Donald may know that my PhD is in nuclear chemistry. My point is, most people say, well, what on earth has nuclear chemistry got to do with being a founder of Reach Society? What on earth has nuclear chemistry got to do with being a senior executive with Shell International Chemicals? What on earth has nuclear chemistry got to do with being a school governor or a governor in a university, and so on and so forth? So there is a component of education which is driven by your character. And I would argue that where many of us don't go as far as we are capable of going is that we are not using that education in direct combination with our character to make things happen. So I'm a big supporter of education, but not as qualifications you put in a certificate and stick it up on your wall, but as an active tool that you use to solve problems, to apply capability to situations. Now, I'm going to focus in a very parochial way on what we should be doing to build awareness. And this for me is an opportunity to sing the praises of Reach Society in this sense. We have been rolling out employability days for nearly 4 years. And one of the benefits of doing that is that we are taking our employability days across the United Kingdom. And what that has meant in practice is that in Manchester, we are working collaboratively with an organization known as TAP. In Bradford, we are working collaboratively with an organization known as CAPA, African Caribbean Achievement Project, and TAP is the African Project. In Southampton, we're working with the African Caribbean Medical Association. In Leicester, we're working with Leicester University. And only last week, Brunel University, who we've had long relations with, have said, Dwain, come February next year, we want you guys to bring that wonderful employability day onto our campus so that we can expose our undergraduates to it. My point is, using that tool, we are able to work collaboratively with other groups in order to get folks to understand how their character, coupled with their education, can make a difference and shape their future. We also, as folks on this call will know, have launched recently the Windrush Day Thanksgiving cultural, celebrating cultural esteem project. And we are purposefully doing that because Sir Geoff is on the call and he was the one I blamed for us doing that project. He said to us, Dwain, if you do this correctly, Reach Society will be spearheading something that will be every bit as big as St. Patrick's Day, or every bit as big as Burn Supper. And I knew he was right. And that is why we're throwing ourselves fully behind that new initiative. And so far, there are 20 organizations who have said, we will become a Windrush Day Thanksgiving hub. And I'm going to embarrass my lovely friend, Angela. She was one of the first adopters. She said, RAFFA will definitely become a hub because it's a low-hanging fruit. And for everybody who doesn't know what Windrush Day Thanksgiving is all about, it's about our community celebrating our 1,001 achievers, our 1,001 contributors in the UK and beyond. And, you know, it's a low-hanging fruit that we should have picked decades ago, but thank God we are looking as if we're going to pick it now. And I don't want to leave my friend Paul out of the story, because Paul will already know that his chair, Oveta, has already said Enfield Caribbean Association will also be a Windrush Day Thanksgiving hub. And you're part of that nominal 24 people who have already said to me, we will be a hub, because this is something that we can all do in our locale. The other thing which is built into us trying to push that boat out is through our big careers conference event, we are closing the gap between role models and employers. And I'm going to embarrass my friend Peter, because Peter is one of our role models of many years standing. And I'm going to embarrass my friend, Professor Sir Geoff Palmer, because he too has graced and led one of our careers conferences, and we are grateful for that. So I know folks who are involved in this call understand that by making ourselves available to talk to our young people, we are opening their eyes to the sort of system consciousness that we need. And of course, Donald and I are two of the people quarterbacking all of these events, you know, and Donald leads a STEM team that started as a workshop and is now got a stand of its own and is just getting bigger and bigger. I'm not sure what he's feeding those young people, but they love going to the STEM table to talk STEM matters. So I'm willing to say that as Reach Society, we continue to play our part to actually build awareness of what people need to continue to do more of, so we understand how the system works, so that we can continue to make progress and move ahead. Thanks, Donald.
Thank you, Dwain. So we've come to the end of Ask Our Experts in terms of system consciousness. And since we started with Sir Geoff, I feel it's only fitting we end with you, Sir Geoff. And you've heard folks provide their view of system consciousness, which is around, but overall it's around awareness, as you've identified, of the environment. And you've heard others talk about potentially solutions. So you're summing up, sir.
Be very quick. My aunts and my mum are not educated, left school at 11. But one of the things they've always said to me, and the way I teach, I leave a phrase that people can remember. That's what I think I say to my students. And they used to say, use your education, boy, but also use your head. Use your head. That's system consciousness. The point is that when you're standing in front of a policeman or you're in an interview, use your head. And therefore, what they're saying is that you understand the situation. Now use that education to negotiate your way. And therefore, that is system consciousness. And if I go back to the young man at the interview, what I said to him then was, what you were being put through was a nonsense. The interviewer knew it. Was a nonsense question. You therefore have got to ask an answer. You've got to respond in a way that he can't reply. So what you should have said to him, could you define dirt?
Nice.
And that's exactly what I do with slavery. All the historians in the country are saying to me, but there are slaves here and there are slaves there. I say, define them. Because until you've defined them, I cannot compare them with chattel slavery. which means a slave has no right to life and was property, and it was legal, thus compensation was paid. Which minor comes into that category? And therefore, system consciousness. What I've just said there, those examples, I hope the children remember those, because that's using your education in a situation where you don't have to fight. You just use your head.
Well, what can I say? I normally would do, and you all know, I would do a summing up at the end, but I think what Sir Geoff said is far more appropriate. Well, all I can say, a thank you to Angela, Peter, Paul, Dwain, Sir Geoff, Keith. Thank you very much for your contribution. This is Ask Our Experts, and it's really been a pleasure to hear a discussion which is really important. And I really hope folks that are listening find this of interest. Thank you very much and take care.